Ifeanyi, you have your work cut out for you. All right. Next up, in no particular order, we have the Chief Executive Officer of Remita Payment and the person of Deremi Atanda. I also have the Executive Strategy and Business Operations Africa Data Center and the person of Wabo Majavu. Is Wabo around? Or is she online? Okay, there she is. Hi Wabo, just wave if you can hear us. What a beautiful smile you have. Don't worry, everyone is blushing here. Everyone is blushing. Great to have you with us. We also have the Senior Writer for Infrastructure, Business and Big Tech, TechCabal. Please do make welcome Frank Eleanya. And I think there we have it. So, innovating towards Africa's digital future. We have 30 minutes on the clock for the session and 15 minutes for the Q&A. Ifeanyi, are you ready? Okay, over to you. Your microphone, everyone's mic.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're about to kick off. I'm not sure what is worse, going before tea break or after. You know, clearly, I think coming after tea break is nothing can be worse than it. If you don't mind, there's just some noise in the room. If you can help get everybody back to their seats so we can kick off. So yeah, for this session, we are going to be speaking to the topic, innovating towards Africa's digital future. I really enjoyed the just concluded panel engagement, right? And just because we are the innovation panel, you know, this is going to be much more exciting.
Yes, it will. So sorry if my apologies on interrupting you. Ladies and gentlemen, please, I would have to insist at this point, please, can we all please make our way back to the main hall so that we can all benefit from this session. There will be, of course, the opportunity to network, which is ongoing. But if you can hear my voice and you're in this hall, please just make your way, take your seat, so we can have a very well-rounded discuss. Thank you. Ifeanyi?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm just saying that I really enjoyed the, previously or just concluded panel session. And I think one key thing that came through to me was, the discussion around the 3 A's, right? There was a mention about availability, affordability, and adoption, right? And we won't be innovation if you're not able to add something to that. So I'm going to just add an additional A to that, right? So for me, it's availability, affordability, adoption, and maybe the 4th A should be adaptation, right? Just giving some of the conversations that they had during that panel engagement. So like I said, this conversation is about innovating towards Africa's digital future. And maybe for me, a very good place to start is, what exactly are we innovating towards, and why are we innovating, right? Is Africa even in need of a digital future, or does it not need that? So through this conversation, some of the things that are going to be coming through quite clearly is, why exactly are we innovating towards Africa's digital future? So I think to help me set the agenda properly, I'll ask Deremi to, take a shot at that and help us frame the agenda for this conversation. Exactly why, or what are the reasons why we are trying to innovate towards Africa's digital future. And before you start, just from a house rule or housekeeping perspective, this is going to be extremely conversational, right? Yes, it's a panel, but it's going to be extremely conversational. And if it's conversational, we also want to get as much involvement from the audience as possible. And what do I mean by this? what I'm trying to figure out is if it's possible for the moderator, the event organizers to help us collate as many questions as possible. Yeah, if you can just capture the questions from the audience on a piece of paper or something like that. And even during the conversation, some of those questions may actually form part of our interaction. So without wasting too much time, I'll hand it over to you, Deremi, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and to just say a very big thank you for giving this opportunity to this panel to share thoughts, and more importantly, to the organizers of the event. It's been a great day talking about the things that will move Africa forward, especially from the context of digital infrastructure. And this is supposed to be talking about innovation. And like Ifeanyi said, what exactly are we innovating around? We're innovating around the prosperity of Africa. That's at the bottom of it. And the prosperity of Africa, we're putting it within the context of digital infrastructure. So it's not just another talk shop. We want to be able to map our thoughts to the actions that will make those thoughts happen. The prosperity of Africa is dependent on the quality of the digital infrastructure that we have. And so there's a context to that. And that's why when we talk about convergence, it's about the peculiarity of Africa and the countries of Africa, and that's the subject of innovation. Every single barrier to human development presents and will present itself differently to different audiences in different parts of the world. And the peculiarity of Africa in terms of digital infrastructure will be the conversation here. We must respond to the needs of Africa within the digital infrastructure space in a way that best addresses Africa's needs. When we address that, the easiest way to relate with it will be what are the outcomes. To get to the outcomes, that will then help us understand why we are the stakeholders. Why must we be concerned about the prosperity of Africa? And dimensioning it from the digital infrastructure point of view. One, Africans will better understand Africa's problems. Africans will then have to take responsibility by themselves and in partnership with other people to solve Africa's problem within the context of Africa. The immediate outcomes are multidimensional. First, there's going to be an improved quality of life on account of the availability of digital infrastructure that connects Africa. A number of times we're having sovereign agenda, but just think about putting all of this together on a continental level and what that breeds. So the quality of life would become an African thing. By the time you look at the quality of life across the different countries, based on the introduction of diverse digital infrastructure that meets our need, that works. The second thing is that in making these things happen, you're redefining the economic landscape of Africa. In terms of connectivity, if you're talking about data centers, if you're talking about fiber optics, if you're talking about satellite, if you're talking about hardware, if you're talking about software, if you're talking about the financials that drive all of that. The fourth thing around that is while that is happening, you're actually expanding the skills base in Africa. Because you're going to have a lot more people connected doing this at scale. And scale is where you have the opportunities, much more. So once that comes into play, you can see there's opportunity to build capacity based on the expansion of digital infrastructure in Africa. So in setting the tone for this conversation then is, what role does innovation have to play in making all of this happen? And that has to do with us, how we respond to these challenges. And because I'm in the payment space, I'll be able to give some examples of what has happened. Just think about intra-African payments today. Down the line, I'm going to talk about that. Why it has taken us this long to get to Pan-African payments, the role of stakeholder ownership of those problems, the role of PAPs, and what infrastructure is going to make that happen. So I think those could just be opening comments to get the conversation going. Thank you.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. I think a few things that I already took away from that is, I think you mentioned that, the reason why we're even having this conversation in the first place, or the reason why we are trying to innovate towards Africa's digital future. The first thing that I took away was Africa's prosperity, right? and that resonated with me. Right? It also resonated with the theme of this event. It says the power of convergence. What are we converging for? What is that power that we're trying to unlock? And I think it was even the previous panel as well. At some point, it almost became as if there was a tussle between the panelists on what mode of transmission or communication is best, whether it is satellite or terrestrial fiber. And to be honest, those unconnected or excluded communities, all they really want is access, right? They want access to a better quality of life, like you mentioned. They want access to, healthcare. They want access to education, just the basic things, right? So however we can innovate to make sure that they get included and they have access to these things, it shouldn't really matter the medium, right? Once we step outside of our comfort zone of the industry. And that brings me to you, Frank, right? It typically covers, extensively the infrastructure space, right? With the work that you do. What do you think we need to have in place to accelerate the digital infrastructure, essentially? What do you think we need to have in place to make sure that we bring people into the connected world?
All right. I'd like to say, first of all, thank you to the organizers of this program. It's an epochal one because data centers has become a constant, has become something that we all have to live with now. And earlier sessions have told us that it's going to scale. Now, coming to your question about what we need to do to make this digital future happen, I would certainly say that from hindsight, it's not a function, it's not because we don't have the ambition. If you look at what has happened from 1992, the setting up NCC, getting to 2001, the telco, the first telco licenses, and then we all went ahead to see the fiber cables coming, the submarine cables, starting from Nightcomsat, then we moved on to Main One, to Globalcom, and the rest of them that came now. So along the line, we've also seen a lot of targets, national plans, broadband national plans. So 2012 national plan, 2020 national plan. In 2023, the current minister came with a strategic blueprint. So there is an intention in terms of this is where we need to go to. The government sees it, but I don't think that we've had a corresponding leadership drive to make all of those ambitions come true. If anything, if we go through all the targets that has been given, there's always mixes. We either missed a target, we missed, say, 70% broadband plan. We've missed 120,000 kilometers of fiber. We probably might also miss the one of next year, because currently fiber broadband is just less than 80,000 kilometers so far, all right? And we are targeted around 120,000 by 2025. The minister has said he wants to deploy 90,000 kilometers by 2027, all right? And then if you talk to people, they tell you it's taken us 20 years for us to get up to 40,000 or 80,000 kilometers of fiber. How do you deploy 90,000 kilometers of fiber in 2 years? That's 2027. So what's needed is actually the leadership to make all of this thing happen. That's a thread that connects all of this. I don't think we've had the champion, somebody who says, this is my work. We've used the word leapfrog a lot. It's always become like an anthem every time. We need to leapfrog payment. We need to leapfrog this one. That's how we leapfrog our way to mobile phones. We didn't build anyone. And some companies came to, try to set up mobile phones. We couldn't do that. But we are leapfrogging again. I'm concerned that in the future that we're looking at, in the African future that we're looking at, we might see AI built by other people, and then we'll leapfrog AI. Do AI again, leapfrog, so they would have given us AI, we'll just layer some things on top of it, we'll say, oh, this is an innovation. But at the end of the day, we're only just paying those who actually built the hardware. So we need to come to the point where leadership wakes up and charts leads the direction that is already charted. We've seen it through the National Broadband Plan. We now need to see all of that translated into actual realities. And another thing I'm also thinking about is we also need to start seeing some collaboration, not just between states and the private sector, between the states itself, from the federal government to the states. So oftentimes you have the federal government project something, and then the state government says, when you finish, you come to me, we'll now talk. So they're not carried along when the plan is already made, which is why we're here with right of way. What has happened with right of way is because I don't think that conversation has been heard enough. So when we do all of those things and plus more that we'll be talking about, I think we'll get ourselves step forward into the future.
Yeah, a key point that I'm taking away from that one as well is just collaboration, a point on collaboration, right? And this event, again, is about convergence, right? Wabo, if you're online, I'm coming to you now. It's because I know besides the work that you do at ADC, I know you're very big on communities, right? So when you look at innovation, how can we get the local communities involved in that process of innovation, right? And this is where I believe the last session or the last panel session was speaking to the concept of adoption, right? I think adoption is very closely linked with being involved in the process of innovating in the first place. We shouldn't just look at ourselves on the continent as consumers of technology. What about we become a continent of builders of technology? If that is going to happen, how do you think we can stimulate local communities to get involved in the innovation process? I saw her online. Do we have Wabo? I don't know, Wabo, can you hear me? Media, please help us.
Okay, we lost the signal. We're trying to get her back so we can continue.
All right, thanks. Deremi, do you want to give that a go? So the question again, let me just repeat, is how do you think we can get local communities involved in the innovation process? Just to make sure that as we're innovating in a relevant way. Like, payment shouldn't just be payment for the sake of payments. Education shouldn't just be education for the sake of education. How do we, build products that are able to sit on the infrastructure that we're talking about, data centers and all of that, but are also quite relevant to some of our own peculiarities and challenges of our macro environment?
Thank you very much. And I think we're getting to the heart of the conversations in terms of Africans taking responsibility for Africa. And there must be a big picture behind which everybody is lined up. And for me, before we get to the issue of community, because that deals with ownership, is that there must be clarity of what the Africa digital infrastructure agenda is. There must be a clear Africa digital infrastructure agenda. Today, I do not believe it exists. If it exists, it's probably at sovereign levels. And that is why I said, in relating it to payments, it took Afrexim Bank to actually paint a picture of African payments in Africa. Meaning payments across African countries don't need to first go out of Africa before it happens. Because you want to accelerate trade, you want to expand local economies and all of that. To get communities involved, therefore, means there needs to be a clear African digital infrastructure agenda. There must be also those you're going to call promoters of that. These things don't happen by accident. They can't happen by accident. And I think one of the things that the Hyperscale Convergence conference is about is shaping that and being one of the promoters. And not only do you promote that, then you sell it. So you develop that agenda, you socialize that agenda, and it is in socializing that agenda that you begin to feed it into communities. Because different communities will have different skills and peculiarities they can speak to on behalf of the continent. You probably are going to have skills in some areas better than in some other areas, and those skills can also be diverse. So nothing stops you from saying the African hub for assembly of chips is in one place, it can serve the whole market. That gets infused into curriculum. There's no African education curriculum, and you don't need to disrupt that. We can also identify where they're strong on tech, technical things, assembly lines. There are those who have a large population of programmers already, those hubs exist. There are those for whom they're strong in capacity building and development. So these are the ways you can get communities involved. So that's the second bit of it, socializing that agenda. And then you talk about implementing that agenda. And I don't think it can be an all-African affair because you don't reinvent the wheel in some instances, but you can engage for impact. And getting to the implementation stage is where you also infuse communities. Data centers are going to be located in some places. There are different things that those communities can bring to bear, and there are different ways you can build sustainability by engaging the community. At the end of the day, because we do not want to talk for talk's sake, there should be elements of monitoring. So we've developed, we've socialized for adoption, we've implemented, and that's going to continue to on a continuum. Then we are monitoring for impact. And there's no better way for you to monitor than evaluating the impact on the African continent and communities. And those are measurable parameters. So that becomes like a wash, rinse, and repeat. And I think that on its own can set an agenda for getting communities involved across the different layers. And these communities are multidimensional, by the way. They are the localized communities, there's a government community, there's an investment community, there's a capacity building community. So everybody has a stake, but all of this must be within the context of the Africa digital infrastructure map. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if we have Wabo back yet, but that's an interesting conversation. Do you want to chime in? Please, by all means, go ahead. But all right. Hold on, I think we have Wabo here.
If you can hear me.
Yes, we can. We can hear you.
I think I got cut off as the question was asked. Would you mind repeating, please?
Oh, sorry, you didn't get the question. The question is, how do we get communities involved in the concept of innovating for Africa and by Africans? How do we get communities involved? I know you're very big in communities. Besides the work that you do at EDC and strategy, how do we get communities involved in the innovation process?
Sure. I think I will pick up on a point that Deremi made, which is on the measurement and monitoring of impact. And so a lot of the work that I do with communities is
we can hear you.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So a lot of the work that I do, particularly with communities, is if you look at the one of the hindrances is access or pan-African access at a community level, and how do we monitor and ground natural language. So today we're talking a lot about AI, and our competitive edge is our heritage. So when we look at the opportunities that large language models afford us, you can get the community involved at the point of building and developing those large language models. So we do a lot of work with the academic clusters. And then lastly, we work with incubators, because the likelihood of success for a tech startup diminishes in the very early stages. And so what you then need is an incubator or stealth mode that you are able to purely focus on the innovation, be a standalone, and then when you're big enough, you can then get ingested into bigger programs, either through private corporations or through governments.
Thanks, Wabo. We're starting to round up. If there are questions in the audience, please, get them across as quickly as possible. I think there's an aspect that Wabo just mentioned, which is really about access, right? And I'm not talking about access to products like payment or education. I'm even talking about access to opportunities, right? And I think if we have the right amount and volume of access to opportunities, even the opportunities to innovate, some of the things that we are struggling with as a nation or as a continent would gradually start to fade away, right? And the big one for me is the talent gap that we have. And even the little that we have, they are, living in droves, right? And to be honest, if we have the right amount of opportunities, it is these individuals that will stay back, see these opportunities as an access to improve their communities, improve their businesses, and improve themselves. So my question, maybe starting with you, Deremi, we're in the heart of a business leader. What do you think is the role of corporates? Corporates now could be corporates in public sector or, institutions or private sector. What do you think is the role of corporates in creating opportunities for people to figure out that these are the problems that are facing these different verticals, and how do we innovate around them? Like if you go to any industry, whether you're talking to, consumer packaged goods, or you're talking to payments, or you're talking to education, or you're talking to oil and gas, there are very unique problem sets in these industries. But I'm not sure and I'm not confident that the innovation ecosystem is aware of some of these very niche areas. Everybody's trying to build around payment or education or fintech because it's in vogue and it's sexy. What do you think we can do, in the spirit of convergence, to enable more access to some of these opportunities that somewhat seem like they are locked away from the innovation ecosystem?
Thank you very much. I think those are the right questions you're asking. And I do not think it's too far from who we are as a people. We think that talking about your problems means you are weak. We forget that every problem is an opportunity, because once you solve a problem, it's an opportunity for someone to create value. And you can't create value without being rewarded. And so we need to change the narratives to properly describe and put the problems in Africa within the context of reward. There are quite a number of people who have stumbled on gold. They don't want anybody to know where that deposit is, but they're not going to ever tell you how long they dig to get to gold and what the reward is. If we're going to achieve the economic prosperity for Africa, we must frame the problems in the right context. And also pitch that solving those problems is part of prospering Africa. There's no way, the data that was being shared earlier, the number of data centers in the US alone, the totality of all of those in Africa, does it mean the opportunities do not exist? It's just the way we'll frame the problem. If we begin to correctly frame the narratives around the challenges and the problems to be solved, then people are going to take an interest in being part of solving that problem. And I can just give you an example, even though we're speaking about Africa. Just look at Lagos as an example and think of the number of healthcare facilities that have sprung up in 5 years. And it's just a function of how that was described. Stop going out of Nigeria to address, you don't need to spend forex, you cut off travel, it's still the same health problem. But how you're addressing it is what has changed. And now you're having other people that were going to out there before who are now setting up here. Something has happened, you're expanding healthcare, you're making it more available, you are making it more accessible, you are making it more affordable because you've cut out some cost structure. So when you talk in terms of corporates or the stakeholders who are going to shape this narrative, it still goes to the ownership of the African digital infrastructure narrative. It must exist. Once that exists, trust me, even if you don't get involved, other people from outside Africa will get involved. So we need to shape it in a way that Africans realize they need to take responsibility for that. And while thinking about this, I just asked myself, how come there's nobody talking about African Digital Infrastructure Investment Bond? People have talked about Pan-African routes, cutting from Egypt down or Morocco down to South Africa, and people are going to put money behind that. People talk about inland fiber cables, and people are going to put money. So who is talking about the African digital infrastructure and what is required? And I'm also thinking if that narrative is well shaped, and most of the investment comes in bits and pieces from within Africa, whatever that part is, it has the potentials of guaranteeing the success much more, because you know you've got a skin in the game. And these are the way opportunities can be framed. And I know there are people here who are probably investment advisors. There are people here who are infrastructure advisors. We need to begin to shape the narrative differently. And for me, that is one innovation. So it may be intellectual innovation, not necessarily in building the infrastructure itself, but how we respond to the problems of Africa is also an opportunity for innovation. Thank you.
Absolutely. You know, sometimes when we come to these events, it's very possible or is easy for it to become just another event. You know, it becomes a talk shop very easily. And I'm not really a fan of that personally. So I'm wondering what kind of key takeaways and actions that we can even start to, you know, move away from this event with. And Wabo, I'm coming to you now if you're online. Just still on the same topic of, you know, creating access to opportunities to innovators. This event was almost starting to become a topic on power or lack of power. When you look at data centers, the amount of power required to, you know, run businesses or run any kind of infrastructure business on the continent. You know, so if we looked at just power as a problem, right? I mean, in data center space, your business is really around the model of how you price for power and how you price for space, like in terms of your rack space and utilization. Like, even if we call that specific one a problem, how do you think, I mean, borrowing the MIS terms, how do you think we can shape the narrative around the data center or the, you know, digital infrastructure demands and needs in such a way that we can even get a lot of buy-in, whether from DFIs, from Africans in diaspora, from Africans living in Africa, on a call to action to say, this is a problem that is a hindrance, you know, in terms of keeping us from getting to that next milestone. How do we call that or frame that problem in such a way that we galvanize around it?
Power and energy. World Energy Council that has defined the risk for Africa and termed it the energy trilemma, which is security, affordability, and sustainability. I'll start with the last one, which is sustainability. If we look at all the alternative energy sources, the value chain is not completely green. You still have to drive a truck to the solar farm to deliver the panels. So there is an opportunity. I think Frank mentioned, you know, our leaders. And so I tend to present the second half, or at least speak to the second half of that problem, which is the citizen's voice. Because where we are building these solar farms, where we are building these data centers, it is in the heart of the communities. So the sustainability, how best can I have sustainable energy sources closer to the sites of producing the power? The second one is affordability. And so maybe to the investors in the room, you know, I always start with a disclaimer, I don't have a finance background. But if we model our returns, assuming that Africa has already been lit up, then the effort in terms of the motivation and the monitoring of that investment suddenly is quantifiable, right? And so if we assume going to school, there's healthcare, there's prosperity, you can then look at that economic contribution of the continent, taking into account its natural resources. Thirdly, the security. We know that diesel and energy sources for oil, there's probably about 13 countries worldwide. So it puts a premium on a scarce resource. When we move to the alternative energy sources, it drives down the cost of operation. It drives down, diesel for us is the highest cost when it comes to ensuring availability. Our customers expect. And then finally, going back to the
Wabo, we're struggling with the connection.
Will be delivering content.
Wabo, we're struggling to hear you. The connection is really poor. Apologies.
Users. It's very
Multimedia, could we just mute?
understand what type.
Okay, I'm sure we'll get her signal back very soon.
Yeah. Yeah, Frank, please wrap up. Just a few seconds.
Just a question that you were asking. If you want to get the diaspora to be part of this digital future that we're trying to craft, I'm thinking, the jury is still out what's happened with the US PF, the fund that is available for internet service providers and all that. I'm thinking that, can we replicate that kind of funding and maybe review how it's governed and how money is coming to it, and make it in such a way that people from outside can actually put money in it, and expect a return on investment. All right? So what that means is that if you're a data center operator, whatever aspect of the telecom industry that you're part of, you need capital for something, you can apply to that fund and you get your money, go do whatever it is that you want to do, then you return with a certain interest on it. That way, those guys outside are part of it, but then there should also be maybe a condition that ensures that these monies are used in areas where they are needed the most. All right, according to the NCC, all right, there are currently about 97 communities that are underserved or not served at all. And inside the community, you have about 27-point-something million Nigerians still living there. So, can we target such communities? And if we're targeting them, what is the business case that we're taking there that will ensure return on investment? Because whoever is bringing money from outside as a Nigerian that's living outside is not doing that for charity. The only way you want them to sustainably be bringing that money back is that there is something that goes back to them. The government can do what IFC has said that they're doing, do a political security something. I think that's how you mentioned it. So you can do that, an insurance, all right, that says if this money fails, we'll pay you back this amount of money.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So that can be a way to bring in the diaspora. That fund doesn't get governed by the government anymore. It will now be governed by neutral people who can actually manage a fund.
Yeah.
All right. So that way you are creating a lot more growth
opportunities
across the industry.
No, thanks for that, Frank. We're starting to wrap up, and I know it's time for Q&A. So maybe what we'll do is take Q&A now. And once we have addressed some of the questions from the audience, I'll give an opportunity for wrap-up from the panelists. Is that okay?
Yeah, so unfortunately, we'll have to take all of the question. We'll just take one question, and then we'll come back to, the gentleman over there, so we can move on very well, seriously behind time. And we need to make up for lost time. So the gentleman here, sir? Unfortunately, we need to just take one question. If you have any other question, please scan the barcode. If you can have that on the screen so we can move on to the next panel session. My apologies, ladies and gentlemen, but we need to catch up for last time.
Thank you very much. My name is Ejike Onyaso, Adaba Consult. It's a direct question. A whole lot have been said from the beginning of the panel session to now. And it tends to look as if it's been more of rhetorics. Talk. I hear you when you talked about so many broadband plans that have been put in place. So my question is, what can we do in the immediate to accelerate the innovation towards digitizing African future? What can we do in the immediate? I knew that not quite long, the Ministry of Communication, Innovation and Digital Economy hosted this AI summit at Abuja. Yes, further to hosting it, what can be done to actually bring it to reality, bring it to life in terms of having something tangible as opposed to having conferences and then we talk and everybody goes home and then next year the same thing happens and the same thing happens the year after. Just like we have the various broadband plan that have always been shifted, now is now shifted again. So I don't know what can be done. And then who will drive it? So one is what can we do to actualize it in the immediate, and who will drive it? Thank you.
Okay, so I think that what needs to be done clearly is that, I love the drive for AI, right? However, I think that there needs to be an academic back into it, the schools back in, research back into it. Some of us were concerned when they said they were going to bring 120 researchers, AI researchers. My question was, who is researching AI in Nigeria? You know, how do you define an AI researcher in Nigeria? But if we had a pipeline, a talent pipeline, where it is connected to the universities, the research, we would have gone, it would have been easy for us to say, okay, University of Lagos, OAU, Covenant University, University of Ibadan, they're already doing something, all right? We can get all the people who are researching AI in those institutions and add them up with people who have invested maybe in AI, then we can get, we'll get ourselves somewhere, all right? It is, I don't think it's just enough for us to say, okay, let's start an AI project, but that AI project has to be rooted somewhere. It has to be rooted in our institution. It has to be rooted in our schools. Our students have to be a part of it, the discussion that we're talking about. So it's linking is like Yaba Corn Valley. 50,000 used to round the fiber, but what I was also thinking, how can we then link that fiber up with the University of Lagos, link it up with University of I think LASU, Lautech, and all of them, to connect all that ecosystem, all right? And then bring out the kind of tech ecosystem that Silicon Valley is like, and other tech ecosystem that we all talk about. So I think, first of all, we need to start going back to the place of research. How much are we investing? It boils down again to leadership. Who is going to drive it is a leadership. Private sector can come in, but leadership.
I think let's start wrapping up. Do you want to attend to that question, or you want to give your final thoughts? Yeah. Maybe Frank, your final thoughts, and then we'll go around. Your final thoughts. We're wrapping up.
Okay. So my final thought is that we need to start getting intentional. about how we drive our digital future. Okay, it's gone beyond the cliches, the constant telling us about the potential of Nigeria. We need to start thinking about how do we transform that potential into actual reality. How do we bring out the best from our talent? All right, many of them are leaving the country and some of them are working from the country outside. How come they are not looking to work for companies inside the country more than they do outside? So all of those things need to be fixed for me before we start thinking about how do we leapfrog every other emerging technologies that are coming out of there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wabo, do we have Wabo on the line? Wabo, I hope your connection or the connection is better this time. Just find out what as we wrap up, please.
Me too. All right. Final thoughts. I think on my side, what can we do now? I think we have started with this Hyperscalers Convergence. And so it is, what then do we do? We are connections today in the room. Hyperscalers Africa, and we are building a portal. So we talk about a tech ecosystem. We need an Africa tech ecosystem. As a tech startup, who's my peer in a different country in this field? Whether it's in the manufacturing space, whether it is in the renewable energy space. Move up the stack, data center to data centers. We talk about interconnected fabrics. And earlier on, we said we need to collaborate. Government programs, execution of that plan, that we need the ecosystem, because what we know for sure is we are building for a world that we have not seen. And so that constant collaboration, constant communication, which is a DevOps culture that we all need to adopt. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Wabo. How many of you in the audience would agree that the last panel session for this event so far is probably the most enjoyable so far? And it really is because all of them were on stage, right? We didn't have to deal with this whole joining online and stuff like that. And it really shows the deficit that we have where it comes to connectivity. You know, even hosting an event like this seamlessly is a challenge, right? Your final thoughts, Deremi.
Thank you again, Ifeanyi, and to Frank and to Wabo for sharing thoughts. And in response to EJK's question as I round off, he's asking a very direct question, moving away from talk to action. And like Wabo said, we have started. And you use the Nigerian example. The first thing is, there is a blueprint of what we want to do. And government of Nigeria, through the Ministry of Digital Economy and Innovation, is taking responsibility for that. And that looks visible enough. The second bit of it, I think, aligns with the framework I shared earlier. There must be a conscious socialization of that vision. And that model can be adopted. Where is each country? What have they plotted? And then that is where those of us here need to take responsibility. Many times, every person is just looking for a piece of the cake. Trust me, if we continue on that path, we're just going to get so small. But when we build bigger, there's a bigger thing everybody can get involved with. So we need to be active stakeholders in being contributors to that framework and holding accountable the custodians of the framework and making ourselves willing collaborators. The framework cannot be executed without our involvement anyway. So we need to find ways to become actively involved. So we can compete, but we can still collaborate in creating that framework and baking the cake. Then our main job can be, how do we share it? But trust me, there's enough to go around. On a last note, that brings the issue of collaboration. How we actually network, And I think that's one thing the organizers of this conference need to figure out. Beyond this room, what next? How can each one of us be brought in to be actively involved in taking the conversations forward and commitment to the actions that will follow after now? And on a larger scale, putting on the continental level, like I said, from where I sit, there must be ownership. And talking about domesticating payments in Africa today, we just need to after now go to find out the vision of birthing the Pan-African payment and settlement system. Afrexim Bank had to take hold of it, and the African treaty needed to be touched in different places to make it part of the agenda. The African digital infrastructure agenda must also be embedded into the fabric of what makes the continent to work. And behind that, all of us can galvanize and make it work. And that will be my own action plan and commitments from after this. Thank you.
Fantastic. I like it. We're already getting commitments. So for me, in terms of a wrap-up statement, I'm just going to try and do the very difficult work of trying to, link all of the things that have been said together. So I heard the talk on research. Let's do more research. To Wabo's point as well, let's make sure that this research provides locally and community-based context, in terms of the types of innovation that we should be driving towards. And I think when we have done that, right, we then need to envision an Africa Digital Infrastructure Fund, like you called it, right? All of these things are bringing us towards a place where we are all supposed to be stakeholders. And which is why, I did like that last question, but I'm not a fan of the question that says who, right? Because when you say who, it sounds as if it's external to you, right? I'm more a fan of saying, what is available and what can I do to contribute towards enabling it or strengthening it by contributing my thoughts, my resources. I'm very aware, maybe by the virtue of the work that I do, that the number of business executives, even seated in this room right now, whose sole agenda really is to try and talk to different corporates and enable these corporates to come into the innovation ecosystem by way of providing access to opportunities that are problem sets for these industries and for these corporate leaders. I think if we get involved in that type of conversation, I think we should be able to truly build and innovate towards Africa's digital future. But thanks again, all the panelists, and thanks again, all the audience for listening to us. Thanks.